the first votes can be cast. And we'll check back in with election law expert David Becker on the status of challenges to the right to vote. Plus, landslides in California and the bizarre case of a serial threatener of members of Congress. And finally, the opening of this show may be one of the last offerings in American life that does not solicit a tip from you when it's completed, though we were thinking about putting out a tip jar. We'll discuss the tipping culture with a professor who has studied the growing phenomena. The Daily Report starts in a moment. Hello, thank you for joining us. We begin our report with new charges from the United States government against the senior Hamas leaders involved in the October 7th attack on Israel. According to the criminal complaint from the Justice Department, Hamas's top leadership planned, supported, and praised the attacks. Attorney General Merrick Garland also noted the deaths of 6 more hostages over the weekend, including an Israeli American. Here's some of what Garland said Tuesday about the DOJ's new actions.
The charges unsealed today are just one part of our effort to target every aspect of Hamas's operations. These actions will not be our last. The Justice Department has a long memory. We will pursue the terrorists responsible for murdering Americans and those who illegally provide them with material support for the rest of their lives.
Thousands of Israeli protesters returned to the streets Tuesday, accusing their government of stalling on a ceasefire and hostage release deal with Hamas. Our Imtiaz Tayyab is in Tel Aviv with the latest. Imtiaz?
Well, John, as you can see, for a third night, Israelis have come to the center of Tel Aviv in their thousands to demand a ceasefire in Gaza and the release of the hostages, saying that Prime Minister Netanyahu is squarely to blame for the deaths of the 6 Israeli hostages in Gaza, saying that if there was a deal, they wouldn't have been killed. Now, the Prime Minister addressed the nation yesterday, where for a moment he showed some contrition, asking for forgiveness, saying that he wishes he was able to bring those murdered hostages home. And then he very quickly pivoted in saying his strategy was not going to change, and that the war in Gaza clearly wasn't going to end because, in his words, he was not going to remove Israeli forces from what's known as the Philadelphia Corridor. Now, this is this narrow strip of land along the border with Egypt. Hamas has consistently said it won't accept any agreement with Israeli forces there, but Prime Minister Netanyahu saying no matter what these people say, no matter what they want, he is not going to accept a deal. And that, of course, is heartbreaking for so many people here who just want to see an end to the war in Gaza, which will mean the hostages will come home. John.
Imtiaz Tayyab in Tel Aviv. Thank you. We're grateful to be joined by John Alterman. He is the Senior Vice President and Director of the Middle East Program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. John, good to be with you again. Let's start with these Justice Department charges against the Hamas leaders. What's the practical effect of those charges?
This, to me, is just another sign that when the Biden administration operates, it takes the whole of government approach. There's obviously an intelligence piece to this. There's a military piece. And now there's a Justice Department piece to pursuing groups like Hamas, terrorist groups all over the world. And especially after 9/11, the United States has built an increasingly robust set of tools, and now it's using them. It's really unconnected to what's happening on the ground day to day. This is a long-term effort, and it will have long-term implications.
So in terms of the day-to-day, the Washington Post and others are reporting that the White House, the president, is now planning to present a quote, take-it-or-leave-it deal on the negotiations that are ongoing with a hostage release and a ceasefire. Take it or leave it. Okay, let's say they present that, and then what? I mean, in other words, they haven't been taking the previous White House plans, so why is this going to be any different?
It seems to me that what the White House has decided to do is to stop trying to get Prime Minister Netanyahu to their side through quietly talking with him, that there will be an effort to persuade the Israeli public that this is a serious effort that the Netanyahu government has to take. And I think the White House has concluded that the only people who can persuade Prime Minister Netanyahu to act differently are his public. He's democratically elected. He's interested in staying in office. And it feels to me like this is the White House reaching out to the Israeli public, perhaps catalyzing a response in Israel because of a sense that quietly working with Prime Minister Netanyahu over 10 months, supporting him, trying to embrace him, hasn't gotten him to take the kinds of steps the United States wants him to do. In fact, the argument that was in Yediot Ahronot, one of the major Israeli newspapers today, says that Netanyahu purposely walked back the offer he had made May 27th in order to avoid making precisely the kind of agreement that the U.S. is trying to push forward. And the death of American hostages and others is because of that.
So, John, give me your assessment of the effectiveness of that new strategy, because it appears to me that in the face of the largest protests since the October 7th attack, Netanyahu has not budged. And if anything, he's more resolute in his position.
Well, it's not yet. But I think on the one hand, Netanyahu is exquisitely sensitive to politics. The argument that some Israelis are making is Netanyahu has to choose between the survival of his coalition, many of whom oppose making concessions to get out of this war and toward an agreement, and the lives and the survival of Israeli hostages. I don't know how that's going to play out. I don't think the White House knows. I don't think Prime Minister Netanyahu knows. But it seems to me that the White House feels that doing what they're doing and have been doing and expecting a different outcome isn't going to lead to success. If the U.S. is going to stay deeply engaged, it will have to do so on a different set of premises than it's been following for the last 10 months.
And finally, John, on the Philadelphia corridor, it's the sticking point in negotiations, as MTS Tayyab reported. Why is it? What is it? Why is it important? What should we know about that particular area?
It is basically the Egyptian-Gaza border. There are a lot of reports that Hamas has repeatedly built tunnels under that. The American proposal, as I understand it, is we will work with the Egyptians. It will be our technology. We will make sure nobody burrows under the border, that it doesn't become a porous way to support Hamas anymore. Netanyahu says that's not good enough. There are a lot of leaks coming out of the Israeli intelligence and security establishment that say it should be good enough. We can take this deal, move on, get out of this war, get the hostages back. And Netanyahu, according to Israeli reports, is just not willing to make that deal.
John Alterman with the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Thank you so much, John.
Always good to see you, John. Thank you.
In Ukraine, officials confirmed Tuesday that Russian airstrikes destroyed a military academy in the eastern town of Poltava, killing more than 50 people. It appears to be one of the deadliest strikes carried out by Russia since it began its invasion 2.5 years ago. CBS News foreign correspondent Ian Lee has the latest. Ian?
John, cadets were gathering at their military academy this morning when 2 Russian ballistic missiles struck. There was little time between the air raid siren and the explosions for people to take cover. The attack left dozens dead, injured hundreds more, and left many trapped under the rubble. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky added that a nearby hospital was also damaged, although we were unable to verify that claim. We've seen a strong increase in Russian missile and drone attacks in previous weeks. Ukraine says there were more than 300 strikes in the last 24 hours alone. Many hit civilian targets like supermarkets, hotels, and houses. When I was in Ukraine a couple of weeks ago, we visited the aftermath of a missile strike in Sumy. It landed in a car park, injuring 2 people, but was just feet away from a shopping center and apartment building. And yesterday, as children prepared for their first day back at school, a Russian missile barrage lit up Kyiv's skyline. Zelensky appeared frustrated in a video posted today, asking the West for more help in defending his country's skies, as well as permission to use advanced weapons to hit targets deep in Russia, including the bases that house jets that launch those missiles. But So far, Western countries, including the U.S., who've donated those weapons, are saying no. They fear the Kremlin's reaction. So Kyiv must rely on its long-range drones. And over the weekend, they struck President Vladimir Putin's doorstep, hitting an oil refinery and power plant in Moscow. John?
Ian Lee in London. Thank you, Ian. Russian President Vladimir Putin, who launched that invasion of Ukraine, was in Mongolia Tuesday for a meeting with that country's leader. Mongolia is a member of the International Criminal Court, which issued a warrant last year over Putin's war crimes or alleged war crimes in Ukraine. As such, authorities there should have arrested Putin on the visit. They did not. The court has no way of enforcing the breach of its rule by Mongolia, and that's because Mongolia also hasn't condemned Russia's invasion of Ukraine because it relies on the country for electricity and gas. Russia sees Mongolia as a key ally because of its border with China. The U.S. Navy says 2 Marines were attacked Monday during a port visit in Turkey. Video of the assault shows a group of men restraining the Marines and forcing a bag over one of their heads. The 2 men were taken to the hospital as a precaution and later returned to their ship. Turkish authorities say 15 people have been detained in connection with the assault. Those involved appear to be members of the Turkish Youth Union, an anti-American nationalist organization. Later this week, voters in North Carolina will begin casting the first absentee ballots of the 2024 presidential election, though Election Day is still 62 days off. The latest CBS News YouGov Battleground poll, which was conducted last week, has Vice President Kamala Harris pulling slightly ahead of her Republican rival, former President Donald Trump, in some of those key battleground states. Vice President Harris joined her boss, that's Joe Biden, on Labor Day in Pittsburgh for their first joint appearance, and Tuesday launched a bus tour in Donald Trump's backyard of Palm Beach, Florida. The Vice President is expected to visit several of those battleground states to highlight the different stances she and Trump take on reproductive rights before returning to Pittsburgh on Thursday. Former President Trump will be back on the trail after a relatively quiet Labor Day weekend. Trump will appear virtually at an event in Las Vegas and deliver a speech in New York on Thursday. He'll also hold a rally in Wisconsin on Saturday. For more on this, let's bring in CBS News Chief Washington Correspondent Major Garrett. Major, I'm going to throw the door open for you on the first question. What's on your mind right now with the race where it is?
To me, John, the central question of this election is, will there be a reconsideration of former President Trump? Here's what I mean. This election so far has been unlike the 2 ones that Donald Trump participated in 2016 and 2020. How so? In 2016, Donald Trump never led, and he won narrowly over Hillary Clinton, unexpectedly. In 2020, he trailed Joe Biden considerably and lost narrowly. This election cycle, though, Trump had a lead. In Milwaukee, that's all anyone could talk about. All the Republicans were measuring the drapes of the White House, describing how big the Trump victory was going to be. Trump was the leader for the very first time in his political career. Now, as our poll and many others show, with a switch from Joe Biden to Kamala Harris, Trump is no longer the leader. He may be close, but he lost what he once had. That's never happened before in Donald Trump's political life, John. He's always been the trailer who closed hard. Now he was the leader who lost something. For Trump to get back in this race and win it, there has to be a reconsideration of that shift. Those who moved from Trump to Harris have to reconsider that reconsideration. That's a hard thing for any candidate to pull off, and that's one of the things that fascinates me about where we are right now.
So you've covered Donald Trump for a long time. When he ran in 2000, he said abortion was murder and women should be punished. The women who have an abortion should be punished. Now he's saying that he's against Florida's 6-week ban that starts at 6 weeks, saying women need more time to consider an abortion, which effectively makes him pro-choice. And he's promising free IVF treatments. So he's been all over the place in the course of his career and life. This is not a surprise with him. He's been that on many issues. But how do you read this current fishtailing on reproductive rights?
A recognition within the Trump campaign that there is something new in American politics that did not exist, John, before the Dobbs decision that overturned Roe versus Wade. What is that? A single-issue abortion rights advocate voter. I think, John, if you and I were to compare our notebooks of voters we have spoken to across the country for many decades, we would have maybe hundreds of those who identified themselves to us as single-issue pro-life voters. That would be their terminology. After Dobbs, that shifted. It's not that those single-issue pro-life voters disappeared, but they were met on the political battlefield by something they had never seen before, and Trump is seeing it for the first time, which is to say voters who say access to abortion or reproductive health care is their number one issue, and they will vector all other judgments about candidates based on that position. That mirrors that we had dealt with for decades before that single-issue pro-life so-called voter. That's a powerful variable in this election. And the Trump campaign is trying to find a way to keep those single-issue pro-life voters while not alienating those single-issue reproductive rights voters. It's a very difficult needle to thread, and they're having a very difficult time in full public view accomplishing that.
Final question, Major. The Harris campaign announced that it will transfer nearly $25 million to help down-ballot Democratic candidates. Why does that matter? Because
it makes clear to voters that the Harris campaign is not the underdog it currently describes itself as being. And it describes itself as an underdog for all sorts of tactical reasons. Keep pushing, take nothing for granted, etc. When campaigns have a lot of resources and a lot of volunteers and a lot of wherewithal, they look for places to put that excess wherewithal. And the Harris campaign is saying, let's proceed down ballot. Let's do everything we can with the extra resources we have to help Democrats running for Senate, running for House races, running even for attorneys general in states. That is the way the Harris campaign is signaling something big might be in the offing, something bigger than the polls currently indicate, and we want to be ready for that just in case. And the way we make ourselves ready for that is to devote some of our resources to some of those other races. Major Garrett in Washington, D.C. for us. Thank you, as always, Major. We'll have full coverage of the first debate between Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump on Tuesday, September 10th. It's hosted by ABC News, but you can watch it right here. And our coverage will start a little before the debate. It'll start at 8 p.m. Eastern. The land keeps shifting in the city of Rancho Palos Verdes. And now that hundreds of homes have lost power as a result, California's governor has declared a state of emergency. This isn't just a temporary condition. Officials say power will be off for up to 3 weeks, and in some places, people could be in the dark indefinitely because the land keeps moving. There are also concerns about the sewage system, which could force evacuations. The city has asked residents who choose to stay in their homes to limit their use of water and plumbing. CBS News correspondent Jonathan Bigliotti joins us now from Rancho Palos Verdes. Jonathan, tell me what you're seeing, but also, can you explain, this isn't, as I understand it, this is not a landslide, the one-shot deal, everybody cleans up and then they move on. This is like a slow, will you explain exactly how the land is sliding?
I will, and I think this is a perfect place to be to explain this. So first, you're looking at a home. It has actually sunk more than 10 feet. The front entrance used to be close to where I'm standing. So now to give you some of that perspective how this is happening, because when I hear landslide, I think the side of a mountain collapsing into homes. That is not what is happening here. What is happening here is what's known as a subterranean landslide. So about 150 feet beneath where I'm standing, there is this layer of soil, which historically over the past few thousands of years has moved about at a rate of 2 inches every single month. Well, after 2 wet winters of historic rainfall, what we know as atmospheric rivers, that acceleration has grown. In some areas, we're talking as much as 4 feet a month. So if you have this subsoil 150 feet beneath me, imagining that rapidly clearing out, then you've got the topsoil where these homes are. They've got nowhere to go but sinking down. And you can tell just by the shape of this, what's happening throughout this community. It almost looks like a deflated balloon in some areas. This community has been shut down. The roads are blocked. The power has been shut off to about 140 homes. We're told that is going to grow. The big threat right now is the risk of fire. And the big question now, what is the solution? Geologists are here along with engineers trying to find that solution. At this point, they do not know how to stop this land from sliding. Meanwhile, as you mentioned, you have the governor that has stated that a state of emergency declaration here just a few hours ago. That will release critical federal funding, which will assist with homeowners. Many of them don't have insurance for this. It will also bring in additional resources and crews to the ground to hopefully, John, mitigate this disaster and to find a permanent solution to what is still a growing crisis here.
Jonathan Bigliotti, thank you for explaining that. I was unclear about how that all worked out, and that was great. Thanks, Jonathan. taking foreign money to buy a home in Hawaii and a Ferrari. Those are the allegations against a former senior aide to the governor of New York. Why the feds have charged the person with being a Chinese agent. Plus, we saw what happened on January 6th after the 2020 election results were contested. Many states have since implemented new laws about election integrity, but are they actually needed? A discussion about laws and democracy is ahead on the Daily Report.
These are the stories
1, 2, 3, go!
of we, the people.
We're trying to generate our own hope.
It's a huge deal.
I'm enabling them to feel valued.
Eye on America, weeknights on the CBS Evening News with Norah O'Donnell.
I had progressively fallen deeper into the world of online sports betting.
The risk is the rush.
What do you think is driving the spike in popularity?
I think it's legality.
If it's legal, I'm going to use it. There are ways to bet when you are 18.
We've created an epidemic of child gambling.
You can't walk into a male dormitory in a college campus without sports betting happening.
It's America's most neglected problem.
I used sports betting as a way to escape, when in reality, I'm choosing self-destruction. Whatever I had left, it was gone.
The purpose of the industry is to get you to play to extinction. And that means until all your money is gone.
Go to the ends of the earth. Reach for the stars.
Yeah, I just took off. That kind of thing.
Oh, that's pretty good.
Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
America Decides is your place for fact-based, unbiased reporting.
At the White House, at the Capitol, on the campaign trail.
What do you say to those in your party?
Any cracks in the Republican Party?
Our reporters and our anchors travel the country talking to voters like you
about the issues that matter most.
Immigration is really a factor right now
that are going to be driving your decisions.
What would you say to those who say, look, that's just democracy at work?
Listening to you and bringing your voice into our coverage.
I want a strong, proud America.
Is democracy on the ballot in 2024?
Let us help you decide.
America Decides. Stream our expanded one-hour program Monday through Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern.
Exclusively on CBS News 24/7, the streaming home of CBS News.
People with developmental disabilities were once sequestered by the hundreds of thousands in institutions.
Many of our fellow citizens are suffering tremendously because lack of attention, lack of imagination, lack of adequate manpower.
Disability activists have since torn down barriers blocking them from living at home or in the community.
We conclude that Title II of the ADA requires states to provide community-based treatment for persons with mental disabilities.
But of the 16,000 people who remain in state-operated institutions, half are in 5 states, and Illinois is one of them.
I don't want to live in the institution. It makes me feel discriminated against.
Do you think there are people living in institutions in Illinois that don't need to be living there?
Yeah, because they're proving it as soon as they get out.
A former aide to New York Governor Kathy Hochul is facing charges of acting as an undisclosed agent for the Chinese government. Linda's son was arrested by the FBI Tuesday morning. Hochul's office said they fired Son in 2023 after, quote, discovering evidence of misconduct. Son has pleaded not guilty to charges including violating the Foreign Agents Registration Act and money laundering. Son is accused of using her position to take action that benefited the Chinese government, including declining meetings with Taiwanese officials and sending unauthorized invitations to Chinese officials to make it easier for them to travel to the United States. A judge sentenced a Maryland man to 13 months in prison Tuesday for threatening and harassing members of Congress. 35-year-old Uday Lilly pled guilty earlier this year after making thousands of phone calls to lawmakers' offices, threatening to kill, kidnap, and harm members of Congress and their staffs. CBS News congressional correspondent Scott McFarland joins me now. Scott, what more can you tell us about Lilly's case and what prosecutors are saying about his conviction?
Yeah, John, Lilly's case stands out because it was so prolific.
He was accused of making not just a few menacing, harassing, threatening calls to Congress, but roughly 12,000 of them, spanning more than 50 congressional offices here in Washington and all across the country. It was distinctive, according to the Department of Justice, because some of those calls involved threats, involved repeated dials of numbers just to harass the young staffers who answer the phones, and then it happened over a broad set of time. He's pleaded guilty. The sentencing from the Department of Justice was recommended to be 18 months, but the judge handed down a sentence of 13 months in prison. But what stands out most, John, is not just that this was a singularly prolific case, but that it's just one of the growing number of threat cases being handled by U.S. Capitol Police and by the U.S. Department of Justice. We checked the numbers, John. In 2017, there were roughly 3,000 to 4,000 threat investigations involving members of Congress. That number has more than doubled in each of the past few years and could be on a trajectory to be there again in 2024. All of this has outsized importance, John, as we approach an election in a distinctively politically toxic environment.
Scott, in those numbers that are going up, in other words, this wasn't just one bad actor. It represents a larger trend. Is there any evidence that the threats are getting more serious? In other words, it's not just phone calls, but it's physical intimidation, or anything about the quality of these increased threats?
Yeah, among the higher number of threats are some higher octane versions that people are acting on. Of course, you can remember some of the high-profile cases in just the past 2 years. A man with a hammer seeking Nancy Pelosi, breaking into their home and attacking her husband. There was the case in Virginia. A man with a baseball bat beating staffers in the office of Virginia Democratic Congressman Jerry Connolly. Some of these threats are just words, emails, messages, phone calls, but it's hard to discern what's going to be acted on and what's not going to be acted on. So all of them carry this trauma and pain for the victims.
Very briefly, Scott, what's being done in this new environment for lawmakers?
U.S. Capitol Police are deploying more officers out into the country, more field offices outside of Washington where members, John, may be more vulnerable when they're not beneath the protective dome of the Capitol itself.
Scott McFarland, thank you so much, Scott. The leader of the Catholic Church, just 3 years shy of 90 years old, is making a 20,000-mile journey around Asia. We'll have an update on his latest travels. You're streaming The Daily Report.
On our places, bright, shiny faces.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
Nate has one of the quickest minds I've ever seen.
Tony has a way of making people feel comfortable.
Gail has this unbelievable knack to ask the question that you're asking at home.
I've been told I could talk to a tree, and that's pretty much true.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my two good friends, and we talk about the world.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings, weekdays at 7.
It didn't seem like anything could happen, because nothing ever happens in East Palestine, but it did.
Authorities released toxic fumes from 5 derailed train cars.
Resident, please evacuate. Acute bronchitis due to chemical fumes.
Did you ever have these problems before the derailment?
No, ma'am.
This neighborhood's not safe no more.
We can assure the community that there's not vinyl chloride entering their communities.
Then why are there so many people feeling these various symptoms of bloody noses or difficulty breathing, bronchitis?
That's a hard question to answer.
We're talking about one of the most blatant releases of a mixture of some of the most toxic chemicals that we've seen in America.
I feel like now I have a duty to warn other communities. If my daughter has to watch me die of cancer, at least it saves someone else. This case.
It's like a screenplay, something straight out of Hollywood.
But it's not fiction. It's 48 hours.
Human remains found this week.
4 families shattered.
There's no physical evidence.
The mystery would haunt investigators for years.
There's some questions that have to be asked and need to be answered.
Like a John Grisham novel.
A gripping true crime original. 48 hours. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Stories that inform.
You can be really old at 60, and you can be really young at 85.
Inspire.
How do we unlock
the power within ourselves to be who we want to be.
And brighten your day.
The best part of fame is making people feel good. Always send the people home happy.
Make every day a little more like Sunday morning.
Here comes the sun.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Dragon capsule here in space.
Sightseers in space, the thrill of a lifetime.
Seeing the Earth from space, it was so exhilarating.
But the risks that come with the territory.
There have been 4 fatal accidents. That's a 1% fatal accident rate.
Might make you look before you launch.
If you had 1 out of 100 airplanes falling out of the sky, we'd have a public crisis.
Space tourism, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Welcome back to the Daily Report. I'm John Dickerson. Here are some additions to our top stories. Russia fired one of its deadliest strikes since its invasion of Ukraine, killing more than 50 people and wounding more than 200. 2 ballistic missiles hit a military training facility and nearby hospital in the central region of Poltava, just about 100 miles away from the border. Protesters have been taking to the streets protesting the Israeli government over the deaths of 6 Hamas-held hostages, but demonstrations are also happening here in the United States. In New York, pro-Palestinian protesters held flags and banners calling for an immediate ceasefire. One of the 5 people shot Monday at New York City's West Indian American Day parade has died. Police called the shooting an intentional act, with the shooter targeting a specific group. They are still searching for the suspect. We're just about 2 months away from Election Day, but the legal fights over the race in some states have already started. In Georgia, the state's Republican-controlled election board has passed a rule that will allow election officials to conduct, quote, reasonable inquiries before certifying results. Democrats are suing to block that rule, arguing that the bar for these reasonable inquiries is not clearly set and could allow any one board member to block the certification of election results for any reason. CBS News election law contributor David Becker joins me now. He's also the executive director of the Center for Election Innovation and Research. David, thanks again for being here with us. Is this rule in Georgia, is it warranted, this rule allowing reasonable inquiries?
It's not warranted, and it's a huge departure from what usually happens with certification of elections. It should be understood that certification of elections is just this non-discretionary ministerial act of giving a legal effect to elections, saying that the winner can take office. If there's a legitimate concern about an election, about whether it was valid, whether it was so close and there needs to be recounts, that kind of thing, there's another path for that. It goes to the courts. There's a legal challenge in every state that can be undertaken, where evidence has to be provided, where it's going to be subjected to scrutiny and cross-examination, where a judge is going to hear it. Here, the Georgia State Board of Elections, these are political appointees. Certification is not an opportunity for political appointees to decide they don't like the results and they're going to undertake whatever it's called, a reasonable investigation or whatever, and possibly delay the legal effect of the election results. That's what's problematic here, particularly whereas here, the 3 members of the Georgia State Board that voted for this, it all appeared at a political rally with Donald Trump just a few weeks ago and were specifically called out by him approvingly by name. So it raises serious questions in Georgia. That being said, I don't know if this is going to be upheld by the Georgia courts. It seems there's serious questions about whether this complies with Georgia state law. And I expect that this will not affect ultimate certification of the results, whoever happens to win the election legitimately.
Let me ask you about some other states, although I think I'm going to try and come back to Georgia. In North Carolina, Michigan, and Nevada, there are debates now going over purging the voter rolls of non-eligible voters. Can you explain what a voter poll purging is, and then why is there so much debate about it?
Yeah, many of us who work in this field don't actually use the term purging. There's legitimate list maintenance, which is flagging records to be removed for reasons of people moving away or dying. That happens all the time. It's required under federal law. It's a good thing if it's done right. About 1/3 of all Americans move within any given 4-year period. So it's necessary to keep voter rolls up to date, to constantly do list maintenance. That being said, you don't do list maintenance this close to a major election. In fact, it is prohibited by federal law. Federal law says that there is a 90-day blackout window period between right before any major federal election. And that's because you don't want to accidentally take someone off the rolls when they have little time to get back on the voter list if there was an error. So these efforts are very late. And it raises the question, if they're bringing these lawsuits, these efforts now, well after the blackout period has been initiated, when voter lists are public record, they could have done this at any given point in time. You have a question as to whether this is really about policy or about politics. And it seems like this is more an effort to impact the upcoming election than actually to clean up the voter lists.
Now, I've got a third one in this category. There are moves to take non-citizens, to make non-citizen voting illegal. Isn't it already illegal? And if so, why do we need laws on top of laws to keep non-citizens from voting?
Yeah, it's been illegal for decades. Those laws have been highly effective. Not only that, federal law requires that every single voter who registers to vote in the United States provides ID. That is almost always a driver's license number that is then connected to the citizen's driver's record, their record at the motor vehicles agency. And think about what you need to prove, what you need to bring to a motor vehicles agency when you show up. You need to prove that you're legally here in the United States. Finally, I'll just say that for someone who is here in the United States, who is not a citizen, the chance that they would put their legal presence here in the United States, or if they're undocumented, having risked everything to come here, even undocumented as they are, to paint a big bullseye on themselves and be deported, which is what will happen if they find someone who is a non-citizen registered or voting. That doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And in fact, when we look at the data, the states have the tools necessary to find non-citizens. Georgia has done this. They found literally 0 non-citizens voting in Georgia. Even states that are aligned with Trump, states like Texas, have found just a very small number of even potential non-citizens on their list, well less than 0.03% of their overall voter registration records. This is not a problem in the United States, thankfully. And so this legislation, again, is coming up very late. These efforts to bring up the supposed threat of non-citizens voting, why wasn't this brought up in 2023 or 2021 or 2017 when Donald Trump was president of the United States and could have enacted something to prevent it if it was a real problem?
So, David, as a final question, let me bundle all three of these into a single question. As you've said, in all three instances, there are measures in place to catch bad actors. The laws are on the books. They've been used. There are laws in place. So with that in mind, and the idea that some of these moves are solutions to problems that do not exist, how much do you assess this as a just general mischief making, and that basically people want there to be some doubt so that if the results don't go the way they want, they can say, well, you know, there's some doubt about things, and that leaves them some maneuvering room to perhaps challenge an election, even though there may be no actual grounds to challenge it?
Yeah, it's far worse than mischief making, actually. It is sowing the seeds of doubt in advance of an election. And what this appears to be designed to do is to raise claims about an election being stolen by a candidate who has lost. And those claims will ultimately be unsuccessful. I should stress this. The guardrails in place to protect our democracy and to make sure that the actual real winner takes office are very strong. And I'm 100% confident that whoever wins the presidency will have their hand on the Bible on January 20th, whoever that may be. However, if a losing candidate seeks to spread these lies, and we already know that Donald Trump did this in 2020, it is likely to incite anger and division and even potentially violence, and not just in one place at one time on January 6th at the U.S. Capitol, but now it could inspire anger and threats against election officials at counties all over the country, including some deeply red counties where Republican election officials are telling me and others that they're under constant threat and are incredibly stressed out as a result of the lies that have been spread about our elections.
David Becker, we're going to be talking to you a lot between now and Election Day. We're very grateful. Thank you, David.
Thank you, John.
The last time a far-right party won an election in Germany, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt signed the New Deal, and the world saw the creation of FM radio. On Monday, a new far-right group made gains in the country after elections. The Alternative for Germany Party, or AfD, won the most seats in the country's 2 eastern states. It received about a third of the vote in each, more than any other party. AfD was created in 2013, and it has ran on an anti-immigration platform. But it really gained popularity a few years after, when then-Chancellor Angela Merkel allowed some 1 million migrants from the Middle East into Germany. Even though the group made some ground in this election, it's very unlikely other German parties will be willing to work with it to create a coalition government. Pope Francis is on a 12-day trip in Southeast Asia that could further define his papacy. Francis arrived in Jakarta, Indonesia, Tuesday to meet with religious leaders and sign an interfaith declaration in the world's most populous Muslim country. He's looking to connect with millions of Catholics across the region as the Vatican pushes to empower more churches in Asia, Africa, and Latin America, where they have a consistently growing voice. This is Francis's longest trip since he was ordained. He leaves Indonesia on Friday and then travels to Papua New Guinea, East Timor, and Singapore. The 87-year-old will cover more than 20,000 miles and headline more than 40 events. Still to come, some people are tiptoeing when it comes to tipping. How much should you leave and when? We'll talk to a Cornell professor who studies consumer behavior. You're streaming The Daily Report.
Washington is the seat of power. National security, foreign policy, global economics, every story comes through Washington in some way. We bring some of the most powerful voices in America to the table. We don't just ask the questions, you have to go deeper. We try to understand what's at the heart of the issue we're talking about, to then come forward with solutions.
Face the Nation on CBS.
The justices ruled that Harvard and the University of North Carolina violated the Constitution.
In the aftermath of the Supreme Court decision to end affirmative action in college admissions, uncertainty sets in for some students of color.
Affirmative action really gave us an equal opportunity.
CBS Reports explores the historic decision and what it means for those chasing an opportunity to change their lives.
I knew that college was the ticket to break this cycle.
The end of affirmative action, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
America Decides is your place for fact-based, unbiased reporting.
At the White House, at the Capitol, on the campaign trail. What do you say to those in your party?
Any cracks in the Republican Party?
Our reporters and our anchors travel the country talking to voters like you
about the issues that matter most.
Immigration is really a factor right now
that are going to be driving your decisions.
What would you say to those who say, look, that's just democracy at work?
Listening to you and bringing your voice into our coverage.
I want a strong, proud America.
Is democracy on the ballot in 2024?
Let us help you decide.
America Decides on CBS News 24/7.
Stream our expanded one-hour program Monday through Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
AI is among the most world-changing technologies ever.
Curing diseases, scientific breakthroughs, making lives better.
They can help us with medical discoveries, scientific discoveries, doing better agriculture, having cures for things like Alzheimer's.
It's also going to really transform the way we work.
The uplifting potential of artificial intelligence is limitless.
It gives you a friend, somebody to chat with 24/7 that is non-judgmental. He makes me feel loved and desired.
And so are its downfalls.
The problem with all this AI is that it's unpredictable and uncontrollable.
The choices we make now will have lasting effects for decades, maybe even centuries.
The ChatGPT revolution, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
We are about to see American weapons in the hands of Mexican cartels.
A gun pipeline to Mexico.
We are arming the cartels.
100%, no doubt about it.
Happening right under our noses.
Who's doing something about this? Nobody.
A CBS Reports exclusive.
Most Americans have no idea that we are effectively arming the enemy next door.
This is the story the American people need to know.
Arming cartels, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Stocks fell on the first day of trading for the month. Nvidia drove a sell-off of the tech-heavy Nasdaq. Stocks for the AI chip maker fell 9%. But experts don't believe it's something to panic about. The company's stock is still up 115% over the past year. Investors are watching for signs of an economic slowdown in the broader economy, including Friday's jobs report, which could influence how much the Federal Reserve cuts rates at its next meeting. That's next month. Tipping. The call for a gratuity, the expectation of one, the guilt if you don't leave one feels like a growing part of our daily life, and the numbers support this. According to the payroll processing firm Gusto, 6.5% of American retailers currently accept tips, which is nearly twice the amount recorded in 2019. While tipping has always been commonplace in sit-down restaurants, it's not unusual now to see it at fast casual spots, coffee shops, sporting events, the barber, online. Pew Research surveys shows that the constant bombardment of requests has led many Americans to experience tip fatigue, which can lead to actually reduced gratuities. Tipping has now made its way into the political campaign, not a request for donations, but both Kamala Harris and Donald Trump say there should be no taxes on tips. Michael Lynn joins us now. He's the Michael D. Johnson and Family Professor of Services Marketing at Cornell School of Hotel Administration. Thank you so much for being with us. Let's start with these campaign proposals to eliminate taxes on tips. How would those actually affect workers?
Well, the obvious is that they'll have less taxable income, right? So they'll take home more. But the IRS estimates that roughly half of all tip income is undeclared anyway. We think there are about 40 billion, 45 billion a year tipped in the United States. Half of that's being declared. So let's say 21 billion. 21 billion of income is now tax-free. And that's the benefit to the employee.
And how would it affect, do you think, businesses if taxes are no longer going to be, if tips are no longer going to be taxed?
I think that depends upon the details, and we haven't heard very much about the details. For example, is it just the personal income tax that's going to be exempted, or are we also going to exempt the employee from the FICA taxes on that tip income? And if the employees are exempted from FICA taxes, what about the employers, their share? Mm-hmm. Are they going to be exempted? If so, then it'll benefit the employers too. But it's, you start to have to speculate, right? So if this were to pass, presumably more and more employees are going to ask and pressure their employers to add a tip screen. Mm-hmm. And it'll be harder and harder for those employers to resist. And because consumer backlash, that could hurt them.
Politicians rush in where there is a new part of American life. And that seems to me that this rise in tipping that we all feel is now proved by the fact that politicians want to take advantage of it. Why is tipping now so prevalent in so many of the different places that we go?
Well, technology is part of it. It's easier to ask than it's ever been. COVID conditioned us to start tipping in places that we hadn't previously done. And a really tight labor market has given employees enough power to demand that their employers ask for tips.
Explain the COVID part of that answer. What happened in COVID that changed both the expectation of tips and also our willingness to give them?
Well, during COVID, many people had nowhere else to spend their money, so they had plenty of cash. They were at home safe. Service workers were not, and they knew that those service workers weren't getting, for example, restaurant waiters weren't getting in dining customers. And so there was they had a greater need for tips. And I think consumers responded to that perceived greater need and also wanted to reciprocate kind of as a hazard pay for employees working during that time. And as a consequence, they started tipping more for traditionally tipped services and became more and more likely to tip for services that we wouldn't otherwise. Tipping for quick service increased during COVID.
Mm-hmm. Michael Lynn from Cornell. Thank you so much, Michael.
Oh, you're welcome.
27 years after what was declared the largest toy-related environmental disaster ever, people are still finding stray Legos. We'll fill in some of the missing pieces. You're streaming the Daily Report.
Go to the ends of the earth.
Right now.
We got something crazy. And reach for the stars.
Here we are. Time.
Yes, it's my comeback.
Hey, this is pretty fun.
But wait, there's more.
Experience thought-provoking,
Welcome to the idea of being a human being.
innovative, and truly original reporting.
Look through a telescope and go, wow.
Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
At this moment, terrorists could be plotting another attack.
9/11 triggered a counter-terrorist system that included a secret database.
This person needs a closer look.
A growing list of nearly 2 million people, including some Americans who say they're innocent.
For 1 hour flight, I have to spend 6 hours to go and come back.
CBS Reports explores the system, the people responsible for it, and those pushing for change.
I'm not fighting against them. I'm fighting for them to do the right thing.
The Watch List, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Don't miss true crime anytime you want, anywhere you go. With the 48 Hours podcast. Real crimes, real lives, real justice.
There's some questions that have to be asked and need to be answered.
Listen to 48 Hours on Apple Podcasts.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
Imagine yourself in Manhattan with no police, no army, no mayor.
The people of Haiti stare down poverty, corruption, natural disasters, and violence.
90% of the guns that are used by gangs in Haiti are American guns.
But with an unbreakable spirit and eternal optimism.
There are days where I cry, but we can't be discouraged. We still believe in Haiti.
They're still able to look ahead with hope.
Haiti is on the brink of transformation, a radical shift. Haitians are coming together and saying things must change.
Fighting for Haiti, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Hey there, welcome to The Uplift.
I thought she was a groom, and I stepped back and I went, oh, you're the queen. She's gonna be with me every instant that I'm alive.
I just wanted to see if you'd go to Disneyland with me today.
I look over at him and he's smiling.
I'm gonna remember that the rest of my life.
They told us when he was gonna be born, he was only gonna live for 30 minutes. It's really a miracle that he's with us today.
The Uplift, stream now on the free CBS News app.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
On our places, bright, shiny faces.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my 2 good friends, and we talk about the world.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings.
A CBS News investigation. People looking for love, finding their life savings gone.
This could happen to anybody.
And sometimes losing their lives. Anything for love. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Tennis fans are flocking to Queens, New York in record numbers to grab seats at the 2024 U.S. Open tournament. Day and night attendance throughout the tournament last week saw more than 75,000 fans on average per day. That Monday through Friday window is now the top 5 best attended days ever for the event, and with an average championship ticket price of $977, according to website TicketSmarter. A pricey drink may be just another drop in the bucket. The tournament's signature cocktail, the Honey Deuce, is being sold for $23. Over 450,000 cups of the viral cocktail were sold at last year's tournament, at which point some people need to call the cops, generating $9.9 million in revenue. For context, that's about 1 cocktail for every 1.3 seconds of U.S. Open's duration. Throughout history, there have been several notable spills. Oil in the ocean, molasses in Boston, and the New York Times reminds us Tuesday of the legacy of the Great Lego spill. This is not a reference to the hidden pieces in the carpet that keep biting your bare feet even after Junior has gone to college. No, this is the story of the 1997 event where a cargo ship carrying the colorful toy bricks was hit by a massive wave between the Celtic Sea and the English Channel. It sent roughly 5 million Lego pieces into the sea. Now, 27 years later, the pieces are still washing up in several different countries, including England, France, and Ireland. Ironically, many of the Lego pieces involved are nautically themed, including colorful octopuses, life rafts, scuba tanks, and more. The Facebook page, Lego Lost at Sea, tracks where these pieces are found. The founder of the page says nearly 53,000 pieces are still unaccounted for. Here's a look at some of the stories we're covering in our next hour. Widespread protests in Israel continue as demonstrators demand a hostage deal from their government. The United States has also filed charges against Hamas leaders. Plus, Ukraine asks for more help from the West after Russia launches one of its deadliest attacks. We'll show you what the missiles targeted. And a serial harasser of Congress is sentenced. It's part of a larger problem of lawmakers facing threats from constituents. You're streaming CBS News.
Okay, so let's just start at the beginning.
Well, let me start with this. What is at stake here?
What is the answer then?
Do you know why?
You want me to just keep going?
Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Were there death threats?
How is this possible?
What's wrong with that argument?
Are you saying they lied?
Have you told the government